impact on the world, and a little bit about the art and the literature and all of the rich things that came from the Renaissance. All right, literally, the Renaissance means rebirth. It was the rebirth of art and learning, and it began in northern Italy. What you need to understand is that for hundreds of years, the world had been stuck in the Dark Ages. And even though there were some inventions and things like that during the Dark Ages, really there wasn't a whole lot done. And so not only in the Dark Ages was there not a lot of invention and scientific revolution and things like that, it was also a time where the Black Death had occurred, and so just a low point in European history. The Renaissance is the rebirth of that. It took place in the 15th and 16th centuries, so what we're looking at the 14 and 1500s, and mainly it took place in Italy. All right, the economic foundations were important. So there was an increased demand for Middle Eastern products, specifically spices and things like that. Also during the Renaissance, banking and credit was basically begun in Europe. And this enabled a lot of people to make investments, as you will see and we'll talk about in just a second. All right, so people with credit, they were able to expand their supply of money, and it also sped up trade. So coming from this the dark ages, not a lot of that happened. And so in this Renaissance, you have this explosion of trade, explosion of ideas, new art, and money started flowing through these parts of Europe. So in addition to the money flowing through, you have new accounting approaches, you have bookkeeping practices, and really the standardizing of those types of things. All right, so Italy, here is a map of Italy, and Italy was basically chopped up into city-states. And these city-states were known, and they became rich from trade. And so specifically, those city-states were Florence, Venice, Genoa, Siena, just a lot of different places that were able to kind of grasp, and become richer and more capable. And they did this largely because of trade, the distribution of goods to Northern Europe. So these independent city-states were governed as republics, and many of them were governed by wealthy merchants. And one family was the Medici family. The Medici family was very, very active with regards to the Renaissance, and I will get to that in just a little bit. All right, another key person in this era was Niccolo Machiavelli, and he wrote The Prince, which we'll be looking at. And he established guidelines for how to get power by absolute rule. He was he was more ruled by force. And if people need to be disciplined, do it swiftly. And so he also believed that the ends justified the means, and one should do good if possible, but do evil when necessary. And his philosophy was just that sometimes people needed that. All right, during the Renaissance, art and literature exploded. Medieval art and literature focused on the church and salvation. So most of the pieces of art that you see out of the Dark Ages or medieval were focused on God or focused on Jesus or spirituality of some sort. In contrast, the Renaissance focused on humanism. So individuals, worldly matters, love, you can see children here, and some Christianity, but it really focused on humanism. So some very famous artists and writers came out of the Renaissance. A couple of examples, artists were Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, and we have some very famous writers as well. So Petrarch is an example. All right, Leonardo da Vinci, he painted the Mona Lisa in The Last Supper. He was an inventor. He was a scientist. He was kind of the jack of all trades. He's the Renaissance man is what they call him. That's his nickname. And so he did tons of stuff. And largely, these two individuals. Oh, and by the way, I'll back up a little bit and I'll talk about the two individuals in a second. But here is a picture of Mona Lisa. Here's the Last Supper. As you will see that it focuses on, this is the Last Supper of Jesus Christ before he was crucified, but it focuses on the human aspects of it. It's not about Jesus necessarily as a divine. It is about the human experience of that supper before he was crucified. All right, Michelangelo. He was the one that painted the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in Rome. He was the sculptor of David. And again, he was a sculptor, a painter, and an architect. So largely, these two individuals were funded by the Medici family. But this is the Sistine Chapel ceiling. And David. And by the way, I've seen both of them. They are beautiful. At some point, if you get to travel, definitely go to Italy and see these things. They're amazing. David is in Florence. And Petrarch. So he wrote sonnets. He wrote with a humanistic approach. And what I mean by humanistic is humanistic focuses on human experience. And it also focuses on the liberal arts. So it focuses on history and philosophy and literature. And so instead of it always being about God or spirituality, it was literature at this time talked about overall the human experience. Okay. And he was known as the father of humanism. All right, a little bit more about humanism. Humanism celebrates the individual. It focuses on the human condition rather than on the divine, like I kind of mentioned before. It stimulated the study of Greek and Roman literature and culture. And really, this extends not only with regards to literature and the rebirth of the Romans and Greeks in literature, but also with architecture and other things like that. That a lot of the Renaissance artists and sculptors and things, they studied the Roman architecture and they tried to mimic it during this time. And so if you go to Italy, you're going to see Renaissance things that are kind of, they might remind you of, ancient Roman Greece. Okay. And so it came back and it became really, really important. So a lot of these artists and writers and things like that, they were sponsored by patrons. And so these patrons were very wealthy individuals. And one example is the Medici family. The Medici family was in banking, and they had a very successful bank that was established in the late 1300s, and they just had made a lot of fortune over time. And they ended up putting a lot of their money and investing their money into these very talented artists and talented writers. And so they really put their money where their mouth is, basically. And they said, basically, we really want our cities to be beautiful. We want our cities to be representative of an older time, the Greek and Romans. And so they constructed things that they were proud of. And, a lot of times you hear of the starving artist. And the Medici family made it possible to be an artist at this point in time. And so that value of beauty and being surrounded by beauty is really important during this time. Unlike, just as an example, is, no tenement buildings, no slums, slum buildings, at this time. They were really focused on how beautiful things were, and that it impacted the individual in order to have a happier life. All right, the Northern Renaissance focused in, of course, Northern Europe. So with the rise of trade, travel, and literacy, the Italian Renaissance spread to Northern Europe. So other parts of the world were able to have these same types of experiences as well. So the art and literature changed as people of different cultures adopted Renaissance ideas. So you see in this map that a lot of Sweden adopted the Renaissance attitudes as well. All right, I am just going to go through this quickly. Sir Thomas More is a really important writer. He wrote Utopia. What utopia about, what a great place it is to live and what that type of place would look like. It depicts a perfect world, and it depicts a perfect world socially, legally, and politically. And it's worth a read. And he was a leading humanist scholar. And so, again, a humanist scholar would focus on human experience. Right. And if you're interested, there are pictures cited. A little bit more about the Medicis, you guys. They really worked. One of the main Medicis that did a lot of the hiring of these artists, especially in Florence and other places like that, was Lorenzo Medici. And Michelangelo actually lived with the Medici family for about 5 years. And so they would have lots of conversations and things like that over dinner. And so that's how they kind of got to know them. But the Medicis were rich, but not necessarily Bill Gates rich. But they had enough money to actually say, it is worth it to us to improve upon the things that are around us. They had a mission, they had a vision. And specifically, they wanted their vision to represent serenity, good leadership, kindness. And so, in some of the pictures that I just showed you, you can kind of see that. You see the cherubs and the babies and love and stuff like that, rather than in the medieval is more like crucifixions. Okay. All right, so that is a little overview of the Renaissance, and hopefully you understand some key elements. You understand that Renaissance is a rebirth. You understand what humanism is, and you understand who some of the patrons were, like the Medicis, that were able to fund some of these artists that also believed in humanism. All right, and this spanned over, a couple of centuries, and it really changed the face of Europe. So thanks for listening, you guys. Bye.